What happens when the heroes die? It's a question we rarely ask until we're standing in the silence they leave behind. For the nation of Israel, that silence was deafening. The generation of giants was gone. Moses, the lawgiver who spoke with God face to face, was a story told to children. Joshua, the peerless general who led them in a whirlwind conquest of the promised land, was laid to rest in the hill country he had helped conquer. The elders who had served alongside him, men who had seen the Jordan River part and the walls of Jericho fall, had all gone the way of the earth. A new generation was rising. They were born not in the dust of the wilderness, but on the green hills of Canaan. They hadn't felt the sting of a scorpion in the desert or tasted the miraculous manna from heaven. The stories of God's power were just that, stories. They were epic, to be sure, but they felt distant, like myths from a forgotten age. And all around them the world was loud. The Canaanites, the very people God had commanded them to drive out, were still there. They hadn't been fully purged. They remained in the valleys and coastal plains, living in vibrant, sophisticated cities. They had their own gods, Baal, the god of storms and fertility, Ashtoreth, the seductive goddess of war and love. Their rituals were intoxicating, a mix of sensory pleasure and earthly promises. You make a sacrifice, you get rain. You honor the goddess, you get a good harvest and healthy children. It was a simple transactional faith, and it was tempting. God had given Israel a command before Joshua's death. Do not make a treaty with the people of this land. Tear down their altars. But in the silence left by the heroes, a dangerous compromise began to take root. Why not trade with them? Why not learn their farming techniques? And if we're going to be neighbors, why not intermarry? Their sons were strong, their daughters beautiful. It seemed practical. It seemed progressive. But compromise is a slow poison. A shared market becomes a shared culture. A shared culture becomes a shared altar. Soon, the sons of Israel were marrying Canaanite women, and the daughters of Israel were given to Canaanite men. The lines blurred. The distinct holy identity God had forged for them in the fire of Sinai and the crucible of the desert began to rust over with Canaanite bronze. They started to look less like a chosen people and more like everyone else. And so, the great, tragic cycle began. It's a pattern that would define Israel for the next 3 centuries, a repeating, rhythmic descent into chaos. It goes like this. Sin. Israel forgets God and begins to worship the idols of Canaan. Suffering. God allows a foreign power to rise up and oppress them. They become slaves in their own land. Supplication. Beaten down, impoverished, and desperate, the people finally cry out to the Lord for help. Salvation. God hears their cry and raises up a leader, a judge, to deliver them. This cycle is the heartbeat of the book of Judges. It's the story of a nation with a holy calling, constantly choosing to be ordinary, and the God who, in his relentless mercy, refuses to let them go completely. It is the story of what happens in the dangerous silence when a people forgets its king. The first cracks. Othniel and the left-handed savior. The first oppressor was a king from the east, a mouthful of a name from Mesopotamia, Cushan Rishathaim. The Bible gives him a title that translates to king of double wickedness. For 8 long years, he dominated Israel. The vibrant nation that had conquered Canaan was now paying tribute, their wealth and labor siphoned off to a foreign tyrant. Finally, they could bear it no longer. The pain was too great. They cried out to the Lord, and God answered. He raised up a man named Othniel. He was the nephew of the great Caleb, one of the 2 spies who had returned from the first scouting mission of Canaan with a good report. Othniel was a link to the heroic past. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went to war. The text is brief, almost anticlimactic. He defeated King Cushan Rishathaim, and the land had peace for 40 years. Othniel's story is a clean, simple introduction to the pattern. It's a textbook example. Sin, suffering, supplication, salvation. But the peace didn't last. 40 years is a long time. A new generation grew up in prosperity, and the silence returned. They forgot the pain of oppression, and they forgot the God who had saved them. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. This time, their punishment came from their neighbor Eglon, king of Moab. The Moabites were relatives of Israel, descended from Lot, but there was no family loyalty here. Eglon was a grotesquely fat man, a symbol of his gluttonous and decadent rule. For 18 years, he oppressed Israel, even setting up his palace in Jericho, the city of palms, the very first city Joshua had conquered. It was a profound humiliation. Once again, when the pain became unbearable, the people cried out to God, and once again God raised up a deliverer. But this time, it wasn't a noble warrior from a famous family. It was a man named Ehud, from the tribe of Benjamin. The Benjamites were known for their skill as warriors, but Ehud had a peculiar trait. He was left-handed. In ancient cultures, this was often seen as a weakness or an abnormality. The right hand was the hand of strength, of blessing, of swearing oaths. The left hand was considered unlucky, unclean. But God specializes in using the overlooked, the underestimated, the things the world dismisses as flawed. Ehud was chosen to deliver Israel's tribute to King Eglon. He crafted a double-edged dagger, about 1.5 feet long, and strapped it to his right thigh, under his clothes. This was a brilliant move. A guard searching for a weapon would pat down a man's left thigh, the natural place for a right-handed warrior to carry his sword. Ehud's left-handedness was his secret weapon. He presented the tribute, a procession of goods likely carried by many servants. After it was done, he sent the servants away but turned back himself. He approached the king, who was resting in the cool upper room of his palace. "I have a secret message for you, O king," Ehud said with an air of conspiracy. Intrigued, the corpulent king dismissed his attendants. The two men were alone. The air was thick with heat and tension. "The message is from God," Ehud whispered, leaning in. As Eglon struggled to rise from his throne, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the dagger from his right thigh, and plunged it deep into the king's massive belly. The blade disappeared entirely, and the fat closed around the hilt. It was a brutal, visceral act of assassination. The king's bowels released, and Ehud left him there, locking the doors of the upper room from the outside. He calmly walked past the guards, who assumed the king was simply relieving himself. The ruse worked. By the time the servants grew worried and broke down the door, they found their king dead on the floor. Ehud was long gone. He escaped to the hill country and blew a trumpet, rallying the troops of Israel. "Follow me," he commanded. "The Lord has delivered Moab, your enemy, into your hands." Emboldened by his daring act, the Israelites charged down from the hills, seized the fords of the Jordan River to cut off the Moabite escape route, and slaughtered some 10,000 Moabite soldiers. The land had peace for 80 years. It was a victory won not by a great army, but by the cunning of one left-handed man whom God had chosen. It was a stark reminder that God's deliverance often comes from the most unexpected quarters. A woman's war. The saga of Deborah and Jael. 80 years of peace. It's a lifetime. An entire generation lived and died without knowing war or oppression. But the cycle is relentless. After Ehud died, the people once again fell into sin. The silence crept back in, and they turned to the gods of the land. This time, the oppression was systematic and technologically advanced. It came from Jabin, a Canaanite king who reigned in Hazor. His power wasn't just in numbers, it was in military hardware. He had a commander named Sisera, and Sisera possessed 900 iron chariots. To a nation of foot soldiers in the hill country, 900 iron chariots were the ancient equivalent of a fleet of tanks. They were terrifying. They controlled the plains, the valleys, the major trade routes. For 20 years, Sisera cruelly oppressed the Israelites. They were confined to the mountains, unable to farm the fertile valleys, their economic and social life choked off. The fear was palpable. Again, they cried out to the Lord. And this time, God's answer was truly revolutionary. He didn't raise up a general or a prince. He had already chosen his leader, and she was already leading. Her name was Deborah. She was a prophetess, and she was a woman. In a fiercely patriarchal world, this was a stunning choice. She held court under a palm tree, and people from all over Israel came to her to have their disputes settled. She was already their judge, their source of wisdom and divine guidance. The Lord gave Deborah a message. She was to summon a man named Barak from the tribe of Naphtali. "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you," she told him, her voice ringing with authority. "Go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands." It was a clear, direct command from God. But Barak hesitated. The fear of those 900 iron chariots was very real. He looked at Deborah, a woman of unshakable faith, and said, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." It was a statement of profound fear, a lack of faith in God's promise. He needed a human security blanket. Deborah's response was sharp and prophetic. "Very well," she said, "I will go with you. But because of the way you are going about this, the honor will not be yours. For the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Barak probably assumed she meant herself. He assembled his 10,000 men and, with Deborah at his side, marched to Mount Tabor. When Sisera heard the news, he mobilized his entire force, all 900 chariots and his army, and advanced to the Kishon River, ready to crush the Israelite rebellion on the open plain. Then Deborah gave the command, "Go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" As Barak and his men charged down the mountain, God intervened. The text says the Lord routed Sisera and his forces. Jewish tradition, supported by the victory song that follows in Judges 5, suggests a massive thunderstorm broke out. The sky opened up. The Kishon River, normally a gentle stream, became a raging, muddy torrent. The heavy iron chariots, Sisera's greatest asset, became his downfall. They were stuck, mired in the mud, useless. The Canaanite soldiers were thrown into a panic, and the Israelite foot soldiers decimated them. Sisera, seeing the battle was lost, abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. He ran for his life, seeking refuge in the tent of a man named Heber the Kenite. The Kenites were descendants of Moses' father-in-law and were at peace with the Canaanite king. Sisera thought he would be safe. Heber's wife Jael came out to meet him. "Come, my lord, come right in," she said. "Don't be afraid." Exhausted and terrified, he stumbled into her tent. He asked for water. She gave him milk, a richer, more sleep-inducing drink. He lay down, and she covered him with a rug. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he ordered her. "If someone comes and asks, 'Is anyone here?' say number." Sisera, the mighty commander, fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, believing he was safe under the protection of a simple woman. But Jael had other plans. She was no Canaanite sympathizer. Quietly, she picked up a tent peg and a hammer. She crept over to the sleeping general, placed the sharp point of the peg against his temple, and with all her strength, drove it through his head and into the ground. When Barak arrived in pursuit, Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I will show you the man you're looking for." He entered the tent and saw Sisera, the terror of Israel, lying dead with a tent peg through his temple. The honor, just as Deborah had prophesied, had gone to a woman, and not even an Israelite woman, but a Kenite homemaker. God used two women, a prophetess with unshakable faith and a resourceful woman in her tent, to win a victory a male general was too afraid to claim for himself. The reluctant hero, Gideon and his army of 300. After the stunning victory orchestrated by Deborah and Jael, Israel once again had peace for 40 years. But like clockwork, the cycle turned. The people forgot, they sinned, and a new oppressor arose. This time, it was the Midianites, nomadic raiders from the desert, who swarmed the land like locusts. They didn't occupy cities, they were a destructive force of nature. Every harvest season, they would ride in on their camels, devouring everything in their path: crops, livestock, hope. The Israelites were driven into hiding, living in mountain clefts and caves. They were impoverished and starving. For 7 years this continued, until the pain was so immense that they finally cried out to God. God's first response wasn't to send a savior, it was to send a prophet with a sharp rebuke. "I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery," the prophet declared. "I rescued you. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites. But you have not listened to me." God wanted them to understand why this was happening. It wasn't random misfortune. It was the consequence of their own choices. Then the angel of the Lord appeared. He came to a young man named Gideon, who was secretly threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress. A winepress was a pit, often carved out of rock. It was a place to hide, to avoid the marauding Midianites. It was a symbol of fear. The angel sat down under an oak tree and said to the fearful young man, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon looked up from his work, his response dripping with sarcasm and despair. "Pardon me, my lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about? The Lord has abandoned us." It's one of the most honest and relatable conversations in the Bible. Gideon wasn't a hero. He was a doubter. He was a man steeped in the hopelessness of his situation. The angel of the Lord looked past his doubt and gave him his mission. "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Gideon's response was a list of excuses. "But Lord, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh and I am the least in my family." He was from a backwater tribe, from an insignificant family, and he was the runt of the litter. "I will be with you," the Lord answered simply. Gideon, ever the skeptic, demanded a sign. He prepared a meal and presented it to the angel. The angel touched the food with his staff. Fire flared up from the rock and consumed the offering, and the angel disappeared. Gideon was terrified, realizing he had been speaking with God. That night, God gave him his first task: tear down his own father's altar to Baal and the Asherah pole beside it. In its place, he was to build an altar to the Lord and sacrifice a bull on it. This was a direct challenge to the corrupt heart of his own community. In the dead of night, with the help of 10 servants, Gideon did it. When the townspeople woke up and saw their cherished idols destroyed, they were furious. They demanded Gideon be put to death. But his father Joash cleverly defended him. "Are you going to plead Baal's case?" he asked the mob. "If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar." The people had no answer, and from that day on, Gideon was called Jerub-Baal, meaning "let Baal contend with him." The Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. He blew a trumpet, and men from his and surrounding tribes began to rally to him. But Gideon's doubt still lingered. He needed more proof. He went to God with a test. "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised," he said, "look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know." The next morning, it was just so. He wrung a full bowl of water from the fleece while the ground around it was bone dry. But even this wasn't enough for the anxious hero. He needed to be absolutely certain. "Do not be angry with me," he pleaded. "Let me make just one more request. This time, make the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew." God, in an act of incredible patience, obliged. The next morning, the fleece was dry and the ground was wet. Gideon had run out of excuses. He now had an army of 32,000 men. But God had a surprise for him. "You have too many men," the Lord said. "I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me." The victory had to be so undeniably God's that no one could take the credit. God instructed Gideon to make an announcement. "Anyone who trembles with fear may turn back." 22,000 men left. An army of 32,000 was reduced to 10,000. "There are still too many men," the Lord said. He instructed Gideon to take them down to the water to drink. Some men got on their knees and put their mouths to the water. Others cupped the water in their hands and lapped it like a dog, staying alert, ready for an attack. "Separate those who lap like a dog from those who kneel," the Lord commanded. The number of men who lapped was just 300. "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you," the Lord declared. The other 9,700 were sent home. Gideon was left with an absurdly small force. 300 men against a Midianite army so vast it was like locusts, their camels as numerous as the sand on the seashore. To bolster Gideon's flagging courage one last time, God sent him on a covert mission into the enemy camp. He overheard a Midianite soldier telling his friend about a dream he'd had. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the camp and struck a tent so hard it collapsed. His friend interpreted the dream. This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. Hearing this from the mouth of the enemy, Gideon was finally filled with confidence. He returned to his men, his heart set. He divided his 300 men into 3 companies. To each man he gave a trumpet and an empty clay jar with a torch hidden inside. The plan was audacious. Under the cover of darkness they surrounded the Midianite camp. On Gideon's signal, they were all to blow their trumpets, smash their jars and shout, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." At the beginning of the middle watch, just after the changing of the guard, the attack began. The night was shattered by the blast of 300 trumpets and the crash of 300 jars. The darkness was suddenly ablaze with 300 torches appearing from all directions. The Midianites awoke to a terrifying cacophony and a ring of fire. In the confusion and panic, they believed they were being attacked by a massive army. They began shouting, running, and in the chaos, they turned their swords on each other. The Israelite force of 300 watched as the mighty army of Midian destroyed itself. The victory was total, and it was undeniably God's. Gideon became a great hero. The people, in their gratitude, tried to make him their king. "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson," they offered. But Gideon, in a moment of true piety, refused. "I will not rule over you," he said, "nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." It should have been the perfect ending. But Gideon's story has a tragic postscript. He asked the men for one piece of their plunder, a gold earring from each defeated Midianite. He collected the gold and fashioned it into an ephod, a priestly garment. He placed it in his hometown, and soon all of Israel began to worship it. The very man who had torn down the altar of Baal created a new idol for the people. After leading them to a great victory, he led them right back into sin. Even the greatest of the judges was flawed, capable of sowing the seeds for the next round of the cycle. The outcast's vow. The tragedy of Jephthah. After Gideon's death, the nation spiraled downward faster than ever before. One of Gideon's sons, Abimelech, murdered 70 of his own brothers in a ruthless attempt to make himself king. A brief and bloody chapter that ended in his own ignominious death. The cycle of sin and suffering continued, and the people sank deeper into idolatry, worshipping a whole pantheon of foreign gods. Finally, God's patience seemed to wear thin. The Ammonites rose up to oppress them, and when the people cried out, God's response was scathing. "Go and cry out to the gods you have chosen. Let them save you when you are in trouble." It was a divine "I told you so." But the people were truly repentant this time. "We have sinned," they confessed. "Do with us whatever you think best, but please rescue us now." They got rid of their foreign gods and served the Lord. The text says God could bear Israel's misery no longer. Now they needed a leader, a military commander to lead them against the Ammonites. And the man they turned to was an outcast named Jephthah. Jephthah was a mighty warrior, but he had a shameful past. He was the son of a Gileadite man and a prostitute. When his father's legitimate sons grew up, they drove him away. "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family," they told him, "because you are the son of another woman." Jephthah fled and became the leader of a band of adventurers, a group the Bible calls a gang of scoundrels. He was a mercenary, a soldier of fortune living on the fringes of society. But now, with the Ammonite threat looming, the elders of Gilead came to him, hat in hand. They needed his skill. "Come," they said, "be our commander, so we can fight the Ammonites." Jephthah's response was bitter. "Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now, when you're in trouble?" They were desperate. They promised him that if he led them to victory, he would become their head, their ruler. For Jephthah, The outcast, this was everything he had ever wanted. Acceptance, power, respect. He agreed. Before he went into battle, he made a vow to the Lord. It was a rash, foolish, and deeply tragic vow. "If you give the Ammonites into my hands," he declared, "whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." He was trying to bargain with God, treating the Almighty like one of the pagan deities who could be bribed for victory. He didn't understand the heart of the God of Israel, who desires mercy, not human sacrifice. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He led his army against the Ammonites and won a resounding victory. He returned home in triumph, his heart soaring. But as he approached his house, the doors opened, and out came his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels. She was his only child. The moment he saw her, his triumph turned to ash. He tore his clothes in anguish. "Oh no, my daughter," he cried out. "You have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." The horror of his rash words crashed down upon him. His daughter, in a display of incredible and heartbreaking dignity, did not argue. "My father," she said, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites." She had only one request. "Let me have 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." Jephthah granted her request. For 2 months, she and her friends mourned the life she would never have, the children she would never bear. At the end of the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed. The story of Jephthah is a dark and cautionary tale about the danger of a transactional faith, a warning that our words have power, and that a misunderstanding of God's character can lead to unspeakable tragedy. The flawed Superman. Samson and the riddle of strength. The final judge, and the most famous, is a character who feels like he belongs more to Greek mythology than to the Bible. His name was Samson, and his story is a blockbuster of passion, violence, betrayal, and tragic heroism. His birth itself was a miracle. An angel appeared to the wife of a man named Manoah. She was barren, but the angel promised her a son. This son was to be a Nazirite from birth, set apart for God. The Nazirite vow had 3 main rules: no drinking wine or fermented drink, no eating anything unclean, and never, ever cutting his hair. His uncut hair would be the visible sign of his consecration to God. "This boy," the angel said, "will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines." The Philistines were Israel's most formidable enemy. They were a seafaring people who had settled on the coastal plain, technologically advanced, militarily organized, and culturally dominant. They were the oppressors of Samson's time. Samson grew up, and the Lord blessed him. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him. But Samson's great strength was matched only by his great weakness, particularly for Philistine women. He was a man ruled by his passions, not by his holy calling. His first demand to his parents was, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." His parents were horrified. "Isn't there an acceptable woman among our own people?" But Samson insisted. He was drawn to the forbidden. On the way to see her, a young lion attacked him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as if it were a young goat. It was the first glimpse of his superhuman strength. Later, he passed the lion's carcass and found a swarm of bees and honey inside. He ate the honey, a direct violation of the spirit, if not the letter, of his vow. Touching a dead body was considered unclean. At his wedding feast, he posed a riddle to his 30 Philistine companions. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. If they could solve it, he would give them 30 sets of clothes. If not, they would give him the same. For days, they couldn't figure it out. Finally, they went to Samson's new wife and threatened her, "Coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death." Terrified, she wept and nagged Samson until he finally gave in and told her the answer. She promptly told her countrymen. On the final day, they came to Samson with the answer: "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Samson knew immediately he had been betrayed. "If you had not plowed with my heifer," he snarled, "you would not have solved my riddle." Furious, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him again. He went to a nearby Philistine town, struck down 30 men, took their clothes, and gave them to the men who had answered the riddle. He then stormed back to his father's house, his marriage a sham. When he later returned for his wife, her father had given her to his best man. This pattern of passion, revenge, and incredible violence defined Samson's life. When the Philistines retaliated against him by burning his wife and father-in-law to death, he went on a rampage. Later, when his own people, the men of Judah, tried to hand him over to the Philistines to keep the peace, he allowed them to tie him with new ropes. But as the Philistines shouted in triumph, the Spirit of the Lord came on him, the ropes melted off his arms, and he picked up the fresh jawbone of a donkey and slaughtered 1,000 Philistines with it. He was a one-man army, a force of nature, but he was reckless, arrogant, and spiritually adrift. He consorted with a prostitute in Gaza, escaping a Philistine trap by tearing the city gates, posts, bar, and all out of the ground and carrying them to the top of a hill. His downfall, inevitably, came in the form of another Philistine woman. Her name was Delilah. The lords of the Philistines came to her with an offer. "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength. Each of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." It was a fortune. Delilah went to work. 3 times she asked him for the secret of his strength, and 3 times he lied to her, making a fool of her and the Philistines who lay in wait. But she persisted, nagging him day after day until, the Bible says, he was tired to death. Finally, he broke. He told her everything about the Nazirite vow, about how he had been set apart for God from birth, and that if his head were shaved, his strength would leave him. While he slept on her lap, she called in a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair. His strength was gone. "The Philistines are upon you, Samson," she cried. He awoke and thought he would escape as before, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. They seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. There, the mighty champion of Israel, now blind and weak, was bound in bronze shackles and forced to grind grain in a prison. He was a public spectacle, a trophy of Philistine power. But in his humiliation, his hair began to grow back. The Philistine lords held a great festival to celebrate, offering a sacrifice to their god Dagon. "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands," they sang. They brought Samson out of the prison to entertain the crowd. The temple was packed. Some 3,000 men and women were on the roof alone. Leaning against the 2 central pillars that supported the temple, the blind giant prayed his last prayer. It was the first time in the entire narrative he truly called out to God in desperation. "Sovereign Lord," he pleaded, "remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." He pushed with all his might. "Let me die with the Philistines," he shouted. The temple crashed down, killing him and more people than he had killed in his entire violent life. Samson's story is the ultimate tragedy of squandered potential. He was given incredible gifts, but his passions and lack of discipline nearly wasted them all. Yet in his final desperate act of sacrifice, he fulfilled his destiny, striking the greatest blow against the Philistines and truly beginning Israel's deliverance. When everyone did as they saw fit, the book of Judges does not end with Samson. It closes with 2 horrifying stories that serve as a dark appendix, a glimpse into the moral and spiritual abyss into which the nation had fallen. There are no heroes here. There is no deliverance. There is only decay. The first story is of a man named Micah who steals silver from his mother, then returns it. She uses it to make an idol and a shrine. Micah installs one of his sons as a priest, and later hires a traveling Levite, a man from the priestly tribe, to be his personal priest, legitimizing his private cult. The second story is even more gruesome. A Levite and his concubine are traveling and stay the night in a Benjaminite town called Gibeah. That night, wicked men from the town surround the house, demanding to rape the Levite. To save himself, he shoves his concubine out the door. They abuse her all night. In the morning, he finds her dead on the doorstep. In a horrifying act of protest, he cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends one piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. The nation is plunged into a brutal civil war. The other 11 tribes rise up against the tribe of Benjamin, nearly wiping them out. The book ends with a desperate, morally bankrupt scheme to find wives for the few surviving Benjaminite men so the tribe won't go extinct. These stories are the final diagnosis. They show a nation where the priesthood is corrupt, where hospitality has been replaced by horrific violence, and where brother fights against brother. The book ends with the most haunting and telling line, repeated for emphasis. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. The cycle of sin, suffering, supplication, and salvation had finally broken down. The judges, for all their heroic deeds, were temporary, flawed solutions. They could win a battle, but they couldn't fix the core problem, the heart of the people. The silence that began after Joshua's death had devolved into a cacophony of moral chaos. The Book of Judges is not a collection of heroic tales for children. It is a grim and honest look at human nature and the catastrophic consequences of forgetting God. It is a powerful, centuries-long argument that what Israel truly needed was not a temporary judge, but a true and righteous king who could lead them, save them, and finally, change them from the inside out. The story ends in darkness, but it points toward a coming dawn, setting the stage for the rise of a king and, ultimately, for the King of all kings.